you've got to have a hierarchy. You've got to have your lone wolf reporters that can go out and get the really big stories and have the freedom to go and investigate them. But then you've got to have a system in place, and a very clear system in place that says, how do we verify the story? Are we absolutely certain of the story? Is it in good taste? Are there libel issues attached to it? And that's where you need your very strong hierarchy. What RTE has a serious issue with currently, and will require very strong leadership to implement, is how do you do that at the same time having exciting, dynamic journalism that is in the public interest, that lifts stones off stories, that tells us what people don't want us to know. And I fear that the confidence loss in RTE currently has got to be restored first before we can get back on track with that. And I don't agree with Ger. I don't think that anybody is going out
to do. We need structures for verification.
We've always needed them, Ger. We've always had them.
Yeah. And they're very simple.
Yeah.
You are either able to stand it up or you're not. And there were red flags.
But it requires very nuanced editorial judgment to know the right questions to ask at the right time.
RTE are well practiced in this.
It requires.
They don't need to set in place structures that should have been there and processed before. There were red flags all over the Father Reynolds case. There was no excuse for the Monica Leach to allow somebody that was not that the producer and the editor on that Liveline show was not aware of in terms of standard or what he or may not say about that woman. What was said about Monica Leach on live radio was absolutely disgraceful.
And nobody's defended them, Ger, but have you ever made a mistake?
My memory. And the most serious one of all was the Tweetgate, the so-called Tweetgate thing.
Doing Sean Gallagher.
Yes, because yes, Father Reynolds was a very, very serious libel. Monica Leach was a very serious libel. But the Tweetgate was a fundamental attack on the one opportunity that the people of this country had to elect a full citizen or a first citizen. At the very time, and before that programme, at the very time they were going to make a decision, a few hours beforehand, and that programme was set up, if you recall, RTE was saying, perhaps this programme is going to be a game changer. Well, they made it a game changer out of it, all right, by something that was entirely false. And when they knew it was false, they didn't have the processes in place or the decency to declare it false when they knew it was false immediately.
They didn't know it was false immediately. They didn't know it was false until the following. They did not know. They said that very clearly. They did not know. The production team, Pat Kenny's team, the following morning on their morning show, did not know that it was false. It wasn't on Morning Ireland that morning. They became aware of it. Just to be fair to people, Ger, because people are human and people make mistakes, and that's why I'm saying to you that you need to have proper accountability in place, because the consequences of mistakes are enormous, as we can see. These are indefensible.
The trouble, Noirin, is you see, of course, you need people to take responsibility. I worked for Joe Mulholland when he was editor of Today Tonight. I worked for Noel Curran, who's now Director General, when he was editor of PrimeTime. Two fantastic editors. I could call to either of them at any time of the day or night, and I did, with a story, with confidential material, all that kind of stuff. Now, if I have to do this now, and that he then has to refer it upwards to a group of people who may never ever have made an investigative report in their lives, or if they have to make a final decision on this kind of material, the chances are they'll make a conservative decision. That's the problem. So it will definitely stifle initiative.
In fairness, though, having read it a couple of times, just to be fair to them, is that it continually says the managing director in the output is responsible. So your relationship that you're talking about that you had with people like Noel or Joe as the investigative reporter, and that cherished relationship where somebody would trust you and you would trust them, that's there within the document, but it is trying to create layers where there's because what seems here is that people didn't get involved in the decision, and we don't know until that's finally issued in the report. But it is continually coming back almost to a point of underscoring it, even in the end, saying even when legal affairs says don't go with it, that the final decision, it says in the end, is with the managing director of your output, even above and beyond, which I would find strange, above and beyond the Director General, because I would have thought the DG should be the one who might say it should go on air if legal says no.
First of all, in relation to Father Reynolds, this was a discrete issue. This was a discrete issue. This wasn't a matter of, fading into black or back into white. This was a discrete issue of science. They were offered a blood test, and they refused it. Now, come on,
Chair,
I've been in this game. No, hold on a second. I've been in this game long enough to know. No, of course not. So, and therefore, there was a personnel and a microsystems failure within the current affairs area.
Which is what they seem to
that's
be
all right.
talking about.
But you know what really gets me about this, Helen? That RTE, by carrying out this complete and utter attack, unwarranted, on this priest, has given succour to apologists for the church, who have been defending the church against righteous attack because of their systems corruption. The church was engaged in covering up child sex abuse in this country. And I believe it has set back that argument quite a while, because it has given energy to those people, and it shouldn't have done that. But if RTE made one mistake, it didn't take control of this issue when it occurred. When Father Reynolds' issue developed as a manifest libel, RTE management should have taken control of the situation. It would take about 2 hours to find out where the decision maker was here who made this wrong decision. It would take about another 4 hours to decide, should take another 4 hours to decide what should be done about it. But it didn't do that, and it dithered. And it allowed other people to stick their beak in. And people who are inimical to the interests of RTE will now get stuck into RTE. And I think that's wrong. RTE has done a great service, in my view, to the people of this country. And we need a national broadcaster. We need a national broadcaster.
It doesn't have to be.
I have my own issues.
Funded by a poll tax.
Yes, I have my own issues about the way RTE behave in terms of distorting the market of the media here in this country, generally. But I'm in favour of a national broadcaster. That's just my position.
This is a national broadcaster.
Sorry?
This is a national broadcaster. TV3 is a national broadcaster.
It's a company. It's privately owned. Don't get into that now. You'll have every private media company in the country looking for
on a piece of territory here now, which I think is very interesting, which is ownership of the media. The one thing you can say about RTE is it's not owned by anybody with money. It's set up by law, and it's governed by the Dáil.
And yet it runs the agendas of people with money.
Yes, but
it does exactly the same thing.
One of the things that came out today in the guidelines from RTE was under the heading of trust, and it said that RTE should make sure that we don't make programs that we do not favour one side or another of a contested issue. We don't represent vested interests, that we have no personal interest in what we broadcast. Now, here on today's panel, we've two people who work in the media, in newspapers, work in newspapers and so on, and we just discussed TV3 very briefly there. The fact of the matter is, when wealthy people, or a combination of wealthy people, own a newspaper, there are severe limits on what that newspaper can investigate if it cuts across those limits, and that's a fact. And at least RTE is in a position to resist that kind of financial pressure.
Since I've been with TV3 now for 4.5 years, never, ever, ever has anybody said to me that subject was off limits. Never, ever. No pressure of any kind ever put on this programme.
I think ownership of the media is an issue if there is pressure put on. I can say in 20-odd years in independent newspapers, no pressure has been put on me to cover something or not to cover something. And that's the kind of media trust that you need.
Well,
that was in a different time, Vincent, but when I was editor of the Sun for 6 years, there was
pressure to lay off Tony O'Reilly.
Well, there wasn't in my era.
Pardon?
Did you?
No, I did not. But you wanted...
No, I worked for a year in the Independent. I helped to set up an investigative unit within the Independent. And at the end of the year, it was said to me, and I won't say by who, but a very senior person in the Independent, really, we couldn't live with this kind of independent reporting because of the way we're run and owned. Specifically, I was following a story that had nothing to do with the interests, so to speak, of anybody in the Independent. But at that stage, Tony O'Reilly and other interests around him were looking for oil licenses, oil exploration licenses from the government, and they wanted to be, so to speak, nice to the government. And I was specifically told to stop a story because it was being critical of the government. Nothing to do with oil or Tony O'Reilly, but it was being critical of the government or by implication. And I was told, you can't continue with that because our owner wants to be nice to the government at the moment because he needs licenses to discover oil off the coast of Ireland. Now, that is a very direct undermining of editorial independence in a national medium. There's no doubt about that.
How long ago was this?
Well, that's the
It's very fortunate that the
1980s.
editor is now deceased,
Yeah.
and would be able to challenge that if he were alive. And I think did you say that while he was alive, Brendan?
Sorry,
Did you say that publicly while he was alive, that you were specifically ordered off a story like the one you've just spoken about?
No.
No, you didn't. But you can say it now and throw it around in the
Why didn't
because the man is dead.
Why didn't you say it while he was alive? And to do the English
I'm saying
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you were working for the...
I didn't say who said it to me.
Okay, you
I was
were
working
working
for
for
the
the Irish
It was
Independent.
your
You were working for the Irish Independent.
Yes.
I'm very sorry, yeah.
But it's the editor's responsibility at the end of the day. If somebody had warned you off the story, ultimately that comes back to the editor's responsibility.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying it to undermine the Independent. I'm saying that there's a reality here, which is that the difference between, we're talking about RTE on the day that's in it, one of the big differences between RTE and the independent sector is that RTE is not owned by anybody with money, it's owned by the people of Ireland, which is why it's important.
It's not me, it's not biased.
But I think you're creating an erroneous impression that somehow we're compromised because we work for commercial organisations that are profitable. And you're giving one example of something that happened more than 25 years ago, 30 years ago, that nobody can counter at this point. I'm saying to you that in my experience at a very senior level within independent newspapers, as an editor of the Sunday Tribune, I have never had influence like that put on me. I don't know would I, in terms of my own integrity as a journalist, countenance it. So I think that it's a very wrong impression to create that somehow if you're in the commercial world and where you make a profit that somehow you're tainted or that you are compromised. It's not the truth.
Well, at the same time,
anyway,
the ownership of the media is a very important public issue. And in particular, if certain very significant and influential aspects of the media, including the Independent, are owned by a narrow band of people, that's important. And we don't really have much in the way of law in that regard. So if you're looking for standards, I think we should have public standards about the ownership of the media and the extent to which it can be concentrated in very few hands.
Perhaps we should, but the more important standards are the standards that are practiced by the journalists, by the editors who produce these newspapers, or as it is in the modern world, it's a media organisation. It's not just the print edition. It's your mobile, it's your online, and it's going to become increasingly so.
There's an extension
and those standards and that trust and credibility is absolutely sacrosanct. I agree with you, but I think they're two different issues.
No, of course, and Noirin, I'm sure you were a very good editor, and that's why you were able to protect your journalists. It goes back to the point I was making about I would prefer to work to an editor I have confidence in rather than an editorial board.